Tian Redmond was a quiet man with a clean record, a former Army logistics officer who ran a modest import-export business in Kildare. Liam Byrne, a low-level courier, moved crates he never dared open. Maeve Kinsella, a tech consultant, unknowingly, designed the digital backdoor the gang used for years. None of them looked like criminals, but together they were the spine of Ireland's most elusive criminal empire. For nearly a decade, they worked in silence, hidden behind fake names, untraceable codes, and clean hands. They were part of the Unknown Gang, an organization so invisible, so disciplined, that even Ireland's top detectives weren't sure it really existed until one betrayal exposed the truth and brought the entire empire crashing down. In the early 2010s, strange things began happening in the rural heartlands of Ireland. It started with what seemed like isolated incidents: missing sheep, empty cattle pens, farm equipment vanishing without a trace. At first, local authorities blamed struggling neighbours or opportunistic thieves, especially as the country was still reeling from the economic collapse of 2008. But soon, patterns began to emerge. Entire farms were being emptied overnight. Machinery, worth tens of thousands, simply disappeared. In one case, a tractor vanished from a locked barn, despite the doors remaining shut and no signs of forced entry. There were no fingerprints, no security footage, and no witnesses. It was as though the culprits had walked through walls. People in the countryside began to grow nervous. Farmers locked gates and installed cameras, but nothing changed. Dogs didn't bark. Alarms didn't go off. The thefts continued, always precise, always quiet. In some villages, rumours started to spread. A gang was behind it, but no one knew who they were. They never left graffiti, never made demands, never bragged about their crimes. They had no name, but they were watching, always one step ahead. Locals began calling them the Unknown Gang, not because anyone had seen them, but because no one had. Even experienced Garda detectives struggled to find leads. In one case, a lorry transporting high-end farm machinery from Cork to Meath was intercepted and emptied without the driver ever seeing a thing. He parked for coffee at a petrol station, and when he returned, the truck looked untouched. But the cargo was gone. Investigators combed through CCTV footage, traffic logs, and even drone surveillance, but there was nothing. It was as though the entire load had evaporated into thin air. No evidence, no suspects, just silence. That silence became their calling card. Unlike other gangs who left trails of chaos, the Unknown Gang operated with eerie precision. They moved through the landscape like shadows, always in control, never detected. Their crimes spanned counties: Wicklow, Tipperary, Offaly, Kildare, but no one could pin them to a single location. There were whispers that former soldiers were involved. Some suggested foreign criminals had taken root in Ireland's remote hills. Others believed the gang had help from inside the Garda itself, but without proof, everything remained speculation. Meanwhile, the economy of rural Ireland suffered. Insurance costs for farmers skyrocketed. Some families sold off their land, unable to risk another season of loss. The fear was real, and it seeped into the soil. People stopped trusting strangers, neighbours, even relatives. The Unknown Gang had done more than steal. They had created an atmosphere of paranoia and helplessness. Years passed, but the gang didn't slip up. If anything, they became more ambitious. By 2014, investigators suspected they had access to advanced surveillance tools and inside knowledge of law enforcement activity. Yet not a single member had ever been arrested, identified, or named. It was clear that Ireland was not dealing with ordinary criminals. This was something else. Something darker, and it had only just begun. By 2014, the unknown gang had transformed from rural thieves into something far more dangerous. What began with stolen sheep and tractors had escalated into high-stakes operations that reached into Ireland's transport, logistics, and private security sectors. The quiet countryside thefts were just a testing ground. Now, they were targeting shipments of electronics, pharmaceuticals, and luxury vehicles. The gang wasn't improvising, they were executing. Their hits were planned down to the second, with exit routes mapped, traffic patterns studied, and communications completely encrypted. It became clear that this was not just a gang, it was an organization. Their operations grew bolder and more frequent. A warehouse in Galway was emptied in under 15 minutes. A truck carrying €500,000 worth of medical equipment disappeared between checkpoints. Investigators believed the gang used GPS jammers and fake license plates, but they couldn't prove it. Surveillance footage often cut out just minutes before the crimes occurred, and witnesses consistently reported seeing nothing suspicious. There were no shootouts, no bodies left behind, just silence and loss. What puzzled law enforcement the most was the gang's discipline. They didn't leave traces. They didn't brag. They didn't make enemies. Other criminal groups in Ireland avoided them, even when their paths crossed. It was as if the unknown gang operated by a different set of rules. There were no turf wars, no drug feuds, and no loose ends. They were ghosts in a system that relied on chaos to expose criminals. The Gardaí, used to cracking gangs with informants and surveillance, found themselves completely shut out. Every attempt to infiltrate the gang failed. Every tip led nowhere. Internally, there were growing suspicions that the unknown gang had moles. Too many raids turned up nothing. Too many leads collapsed the moment they were pursued. Some officers began working off-grid, fearing their own operations were compromised. Files were kept offline. Investigations were conducted in person. Still, it wasn't enough. The gang always seemed to be ahead, changing routes, abandoning safe houses, shifting methods before anyone even realized a pattern. The gang's strength lay in its secrecy. No member had been identified. No name was associated with their crimes. It was unclear how many people were involved or where they were based. They communicated in code, moved in small units, and never operated from the same place twice. Each heist was executed by a different team, and no one seemed to know the bigger picture. That structure made them impossible to trace, and even harder to dismantle. Public fear grew. Journalists speculated about foreign influence, ex-military training, and connections to international networks. Some claimed the gang had roots in old paramilitary factions, reactivated under a new name. But in truth, no one knew. That was the power of the unknown gang. They didn't need to be seen to control the narrative. Their legend grew not from what they did, but from what no one could prove. And behind every failed investigation, they left one clear message. They were watching, and they were untouchable. In 2017, the breakthrough that investigators had been waiting for arrived in the most unexpected way: a stolen laptop. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. The device had gone missing from a tech consultant's home in Limerick during what looked like a routine burglary. There was nothing flashy about it. No signs of forced entry. No obvious connection to any larger case. The consultant reported the theft more out of formality than hope. But when the Garda cybercrime unit received the case, standard procedure led them to examine the laptop's signal history in case it was powered on and connected to a network. What they found would unravel the deepest secrets of the unknown gang. The laptop pinged from a remote signal tower near the Slive Bloom Mountains, a vast and heavily forested area with little habitation and poor road access. A team was dispatched to quietly scan the area. Deep in the woods, hidden under layers of rusted metal and brush, officers discovered the remains of what had once been a telecommunications van. Its interior had been stripped and refitted with signal routers, power, banks, and hardened drives. The laptop, or rather its components, had been repurposed. It wasn't stolen for resale. It was being used. The tech consultant's background made the discovery even more important. He had worked for a firm that managed private infrastructure for logistics companies, scheduling, GPS tracking, even digital locks on freight containers. Files recovered from the hidden drives suggested that someone had been using stolen credentials to monitor and manipulate cargo shipments across Ireland. Layers of encryption covered the data, but fragments revealed access to warehouse layouts, driver schedules, and even alarm response times. It became clear that this was no isolated theft. It was a digital control center. For the first time, investigators had something concrete. The sophistication of the system hinted at a much larger operation than previously believed. The unknown gang wasn't just stealing. They were watching, studying, and planning their targets weeks in advance. Every theft had been timed with precision, using inside knowledge of blind spots and vulnerabilities. It explained why alarms never went off, why security footage always failed, why patrols missed the thieves by minutes. The gang had been feeding on information, not luck. The forensic team spent months decoding the material. Hidden within scrambled. Files were glimpses of how the gang communicated. Short bursts of encrypted data, exchanged through unsecured networks in public areas to avoid detection. No emails, no texts, just data packets, bouncing through layers of proxies. It was technology few local gangs had access to, and fewer still could operate. This discovery changed the profile of the unknown gang. They were not rural thugs. They were coordinated, educated, and equipped. The investigation took on new urgency. With proof that the gang was tapping into Ireland's logistical infrastructure, a quiet panic spread among corporations and law enforcement alike. No one knew how deep their access went or who might be helping them. But one thing was certain. The unknown gang was far more powerful than anyone had imagined, and they were no longer hiding in the shadows. They were embedded in the systems everyone relied on. In early 2020, just as investigators were beginning to understand the technological reach of the unknown gang, the case took a sharp and unexpected turn. After nearly a decade of chasing shadows, law enforcement got their first human lead, one that came not from careful surveillance or digital tracing, but from a man walking into a Garda station in Cork, unannounced and alone. He wasn't a suspect, at least not initially. He claimed to be a former member of the unknown gang, and more surprisingly, he wasn't there to confess. He was there for revenge. The man, whose identity remains protected to this day, said his brother had been a trusted part of the gang for years. They had both been involved in lower-level operations, moving stolen goods, scouting routes, and managing vehicles. According to him, the unknown gang operated on a rigid system of anonymity and obedience. Members only knew what they needed to know. No one ever saw the full picture. Orders came through encrypted channels, and dissent was not tolerated. When his brother began expressing doubts about a job that involved overseas clients, he was removed. Days later, he was found dead on a back road outside Thurles. The official report called it an accident, but his brother knew better. It had been staged. Consumed by guilt and fear, the man decided to turn on the gang. His motivations were personal, but the information he provided changed everything. For the first time, investigators had a clear description of how the gang was structured. It operated like a web, with different units handling logistics, surveillance, digital operations, and cleanup. The man didn't know everyone involved, but he remembered names, faces, and locations. One detail stood out. He mentioned a rural barn in County Lowy where important meetings took place. The location was off-grid and guarded, but not heavily. It was meant to look abandoned, just another old farm left behind by time. With a carefully coordinated raid, Gardaí and military support moved in. Hidden beneath the barn was a reinforced bunker, complete with backup generators, satellite communication, tools, forged passports, and stacks of hard drives. There were maps, ledgers, burner phones, and a treasure trove of information linking the gang to crimes across Europe. Surveillance photos showed port authorities, customs officers, and even security contractors. The bunker wasn't just a hideout, it was a command center. Among the recovered documents was a list of code names and payment records. One code name appeared repeatedly: Crane. Bank transactions tied to that name were traced through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and eventually led to a man named Cian Redmond, a former Army logistics officer discharged under vague circumstances. Redmond had lived quietly in Kildare for years. He had no criminal record, paid his taxes, and ran a modest import-export business. But investigators knew immediately they had found the architect. When Redmond was arrested, he said nothing. No protests, no denial. His silence spoke volumes. He was the first confirmed link between Ireland's shadowy crime wave and a face the authorities could see. But even then, no one fully understood the depth of control he had maintained. The fall had begun, but the full collapse was yet to come. The arrest of Cian Redmond marked the beginning of the end, but the real collapse of the unknown gang was not immediate. Redmond refused to speak after his capture. He gave no names, offered no deals, and revealed nothing during hours of interrogation. Investigators feared that even with the bunker, the files, and the financial links, they would not be able to unravel the full scale of the operation. But they underestimated the fragility of trust within a criminal empire built on secrecy. In the weeks following Redmond's arrest, panic rippled through the gang's network. Without direction, different cells began acting on their own. Some tried to disappear. Others attempted to destroy evidence. Communications went silent, and several storage locations were found burning, clearly an effort to erase whatever traces remained. But the structure that had once protected the gang now worked against them. With no one knowing who else was involved, paranoia set in. Members feared that others would talk, and that fear led to mistakes. One of Redmond's close associates, a financial courier operating between Dublin and mainland Europe, was caught trying to flee through Belfast using forged documents. He had a duffel bag containing 2 phones, €15,000 in cash, and a handwritten notebook filled with initials, dates, and payment logs. With him in custody, more names surfaced, cross-referencing data from the Lower bunker with new intelligence. Gardaí began launching rapid operations across the country. In less than 2 months, over 40 people were arrested, from low-level couriers to white-collar professionals who had helped move money and goods. Each arrest brought new revelations. It became clear that the unknown gang had infiltrated several legitimate industries, shipping companies, private security firms, and even local councils. They had used real businesses to mask illegal ones, blending smuggling with imports and laundering money through fake consulting fees and bogus service contracts. Some of the companies had operated for years without suspicion. Others were newly formed fronts that had vanished as soon as their purpose was served. International cooperation followed. Police in Spain, Belgium, and Germany raided properties linked to the gang's offshore operations. Accounts were frozen. Data was shared. A network that had taken nearly a decade to build was disassembled in just over a year. Yet the full scope of the gang's reach was so vast that even as arrests mounted, some believed parts of the organization might still be out there, quiet, waiting, watching. In 2022, Kian Redmond was sentenced to life in prison for organized criminal activity, large-scale theft, conspiracy, and money laundering. His trial was high profile, but he showed no emotion throughout. Many of his co-conspirators received long sentences, while others made deals in exchange for reduced time. The court heard how Redmond had built the gang like a machine, one without names, faces, or loyalty, only purpose. Ireland had never seen anything quite like the unknown gang. They had terrorized communities, infiltrated systems, and operated without a single public threat. When they fell, they left behind a haunting legacy. Proof that the most dangerous criminals are the ones you never see coming. And for years, they hadn't just stolen goods. They had stolen certainty, trust, and the illusion of safety.